Ah yes, another day, another woman being publicly flogged for daring to express her sexuality through pop music. Lola Young's One Thing dropped, and so did the collective jaws of conservative TikTok, pearl-clutching parents, and the self-appointed morality police. The song, breathy, sultry, and delightfully unsubtle, is all about desire. Not love, not heartbreak, just, one thing. Cue the outrage. What kind of message does this send to young girls? She's encouraging promiscuity, and why can't women make songs about something meaningful like men do when they rap about threesomes and tax evasion? One could say that Lola Young is too messy, and she needs to be goddamn clean. Yeah, I'll see myself out. This backlash isn't new. It's just the latest addition to a tired tradition of policing women's sexuality while praising men for the same performances. But what makes this particularly interesting, or, maddening, is how uneven the outrage is. There seems to be a collective pushback at the moment, with loads of young people celebrating Lola's song, but when it first came out, all of the comments were just yikes. While Sabrina Carpenter can wear a miniskirt and creepily croon about being a silly little girl with minimal pushback, Lola Young does it and suddenly it's degeneracy. Why? Because she's curvier? Because her accent's a little bit too South London? Because she doesn't wrap her sexual agency in palatable pop girl packaging? In this video, we'll unpack the layered criticisms lobbed at Young. Her bad influence, her appearance, her singing style, while dragging into light the deeply gendered, classed and racialized standards that they're built on. We'll ask not just why people are mad at Lola Young, but why they're so comfortable pretending their disgust is about values when it's really about control. When Lola Young whispered her way through One Thing, the internet did what it does best. It misunderstood the assignment and it overreacted. Suddenly, the song became less about sex and more about sin, as if she personally climbed through the bedroom windows of adolescent girls and corrupted their innocence. Comments flooded in by what I can only assume are parents, maybe even grandparents, claiming that she's setting a bad example for young girls, which is interesting, as most kids probably won't even know who she really is, unless they're already into that kind of moody, sensual pop. But let's pause for a moment and interrogate this so-called bad example. What precisely is being role modelled here? A woman articulating desire on her own terms? A refusal to wrap sex in metaphor or apology? If that's dangerous, then so is any assertion of female sexual autonomy that doesn't pander to the male gaze. Rosalind Gill describes this as post-feminist sensibility, the cultural demand for acceptable female agency, sexy, but not too sexy, empowered, but only in a marketable way. And the issue isn't that Lola Young is influencing the youth, it's that she's not bothering to soften herself into something digestible first. And yes, the "what about the children" argument always sounds noble until you realise that it's rarely applied equally. Where was this concern when 14-year-olds were blasting Masked Wolf and rapping about getting high, not low? Or when Drake was allegedly dating teenagers while selling sex disguised as romantic vulnerability? Spoiler alert, it wasn't there. Because the panic isn't about sex, it's about who is allowed to speak about it. In media theory, this is what we call a moral panic. Stanley Cohen's concept where society picks a scapegoat for its own anxieties, often targeting those who deviate from normative values. And in this case, the scapegoat is a woman who's refusing to sugarcoat her desire for mass consumption. In short, Lola Young's real crime isn't the lyrics, it's the audacity. So let's be honest, if One Thing was produced by a man, then it would have been called bold or edgy or, God forbid, authentic. We've spent the better part of 2 decades celebrating men in music for their unfiltered sexual appetites. From The Weeknd's breathy nihilism to Future's emotionally unavailable sex diaries, hypersexual lyrics are literally the male pop blueprint. But when Lola Young does it, suddenly it's trashy, sad, a threat to young girls everywhere. Welcome to the double standard. where sexual confidence in men is cool, marketable, and even genius, and in a woman it's a PR crisis. Feminist media scholars have been screaming about this for years. Gill calls this phenomenon the sexualization of culture, but she points out that it's a highly gendered one. Women are expected to be sexy, but only in ways that are commercially viable and culturally safe. Think perfectly contoured pop girls with toned abs and a winking sense of irony. Sexual, but not too sexual. Confident, but still marketable. So when a woman like Lola, who doesn't fit that stereotypical pop girl archetype, takes control of her sexuality without offering a cute punchline or a high fashion Instagram aesthetic, it's not sexy anymore. It's threatening. And the supposed problem with One Thing isn't the sex, it's that there's no male co-star, there's no emotional context, there's no social punishment, just raw, unapologetic desire. And a catchy beat at that, which should be empowering, but instead it triggers the cultural reflex to remind women that their bodies and their voices are only acceptable when they serve someone else's story. Susan McClary, in her work on gender and music, argues that women's musical expressions, especially when they disrupt traditional narrative structures, are often heard as excessive, irrational, or dangerous. Lola's song is all of those things if you ask the internet, at least if you ask Facebook. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the discomfort is exactly the kind of disobedience pop music needs right now. So, One Thing isn't exactly corrupting the youth. What it is doing is it's challenging a system that lets men moan on tracks about bad bitches with no pushback, while women are expected to whisper about love and regret, and preferably in a size 6. Now let's play a game of Spot the Difference. Two women both sing about sex, both flirt with sultriness in their visuals. One wears miniskirts, flirts with campy 2000s aesthetics, and coyly sings about riding guys like roller coasters. The other wears slightly less palatable outfits, speaks in a working class accent, and doesn't bother to wrap her horniness up in bubblegum glitter. Guess which one is being labelled the bad role model? The twist is, both have, but one slightly more than the other. A lot of TikToks and counter comments to the criticism that Lola is getting specifically call out the hypocrisy of the younger critics. They say that their fave is doing exactly the same thing. Sabrina Carpenter can play the pop pixie, the oops, I'm so cheeky girl, and people love her for it. Bedchem and Espresso can be drenched in sexual innuendo, and people can say that it's empowering, relatable, fun. Lola Young releases One Thing, which is slightly more direct, less commercially sanitized, and suddenly she's a problem. Not elegant enough, not aspirational enough, too much voice, not enough packaging. And this is where pretty privilege meets class-coded femininity, and the contradictions of empowerment in pop become too glaring to ignore. Lola Young is curvier, she has a deeper, throatier voice, and she speaks with a South London accent. She isn't styled to be perfectly digestible, she's got a bit of grit to her. And as cultural theorist Angela McRobbie would point out, when female artists step outside the post-feminist script of sexy but safe, the audience punishes them. Even more revealing is the thinly veiled classism behind the backlash. When Lola sings in her natural register, leaning into her accent and letting her words drag, she gets mocked for cursive singing, which, let's be honest, is usually applied when women who sound a little bit too working class or not polished enough dare to emote. Meanwhile, men have built entire careers on mumbling through beats, with no similar critique. Lola Young's South London accent is a key part of her artistic persona, but when audiences learn that she's of middle-class roots, including a grandmother connected to the Gruffalo, a symbol of literary prestige and establishment, a tension starts to emerge, and she's being accused of nepotism. For some critics and listeners, this feels like dissonance. How can someone from a culturally elite family embody a voice that's been traditionally associated with working class London? Now, this taps into what Pierre Bourdieu would call cultural capital. The idea that people from different social classes inherit not only economic wealth, but access access to particular ways of speaking, dressing, and behaving that mark them as legitimate in certain cultural spaces. When someone from a middle-class background in particular adopts working-class aesthetics, especially a regional accent or slang, it's often seen as inauthentic or even appropriative. Yet, paradoxically, this same aesthetic is often required for credibility in British soul, R&B, grime-inflected pop. We love our real girls from the ends until they aren't, until they get too posh, until they're too polished, or in Young's case, until they sound street but grew up surrounded by cultural privilege and nurturing. It becomes a double bind. Conforming to the expectations of musical authenticity means being penalised for the background that gave her the platform to begin with. But here's the kicker. Even if Lola Young was performing a working class identity, the mockery of her singing voice still functions as classist policing. As Beverly Skeggs would argue, working class femininity, especially when expressed through the body or voice, is treated as vulgar, excessive, or inauthentic unless properly packaged for middle class consumption. Whether the criticism is rooted in perceived inauthenticity or not, it reveals how deeply class coded our ideas of taste, credibility, and voice remain. In short, the problem isn't whether Young is faking a South London accent, it's that her voice is being judged through a lens that pathologizes working class expression altogether. To be clear, when we compare Sabrina Carpenter to Lola Young, it's important to acknowledge that Carpenter's songs are unabashedly sexual and her music videos are provocatively styled. Her performances, especially Feather and Bed, have drawn criticisms for being too risque, too revealing, too inappropriate for a family-friendly pop star. Sabrina did receive backlash, and more than once she was told to think of the children. But here's what happened next. The internet rallied around her. Fans and commentators quickly reframed her performances as empowering, cheeky, clever, and crucially, the conversation moved on. Lola Young, on the other hand, hasn't been as lucky. Her song One Thing, which has arguably less explicit content than Sabrina's Espresso, has been met with far more intense scrutiny, at least from what I've seen. The outrage hasn't just been about sex, it's about tone, voice, body, class. Lola doesn't wrap her desire in sugary irony or package it with ultra-feminine visuals. Her voice is husky. Her lyrics are direct. Her aesthetic leans into gritty, not glam. The reaction, not playful, not empowered, but vulgar, desperate, dangerous. Here's where intersectional feminist theory becomes essential. Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality reminds us that identities don't exist in isolation. Lola isn't just a woman singing about sex. She's a woman with a fuller body, a non-American accent, and a working class vocal texture, doing so without performance polish. She's judged not only for being too sexual, but for doing it in a body and a voice that don't meet pop's hyper-curated standards of desirability. The line between empowerment and indecency turns out to be drawn by how well you fit the industry mold. We also see these class-coded critiques wrapped in internet lingo. The term cursive singing has become a dog whistle of sorts for you sound cheap, and it disproportionately targets women who don't perform proper femininity. Lola's rich textured voice is labelled irritating, whereas Sabrina's babyish breathlessness is called iconic. Why? Because one of them signals grit, edge, and realism, things the pop industry still isn't quite ready for when they're coming from a woman who doesn't smile while she's doing it. As media theorist Angela McRobbie writes, post-feminist culture offers women empowerment, but only if they perform it within a narrow, aestheticized space of choice. Sabrina stays inside that space, with some even arguing that her overly sexualized performances are to target the male gaze. Lola, however, kicks the walls down of that space. Well, it does seem to me that people are just jumping on the bandwagon when it comes to criticising this song. Something that I personally was guilty of at first. I did think, here we go, another song talking about sex, and it's very out there. And then I started to think, hang on a minute, why am I thinking like that? Where have my ideals gone about women being able to express themselves and have autonomy? Have I been reading too many comments about the song? In other words, media framing, or in this case, social media framing, can often impact how we react with pop culture before we even press play and have an original thought. And when it comes to Lola Young's One Thing, the frame was already fogged with moral panic, aesthetic judgment, and a dash of classism. In comparison to Sabrina Carpenter, Lola Young didn't really get much attention from mainstream outlets. Instead, much of the discourse surrounding Young unfolded on social media platforms where reactions were often critical and, at times, harsh. For instance, following Young's reaction to Jay Thirlwell's Brit Award win, social media users accused her of being ungracious, labelling her expression as shady and suggesting she was absolutely fuming, despite her clarifications that she was generally happy for her and unaware of being filmed at that moment. This pattern reflects media scholar Stuart Hall's concept of encoding and decoding, where media messages are constructed with intended meanings, or encoding, but are interpreted by audiences through their own cultural and ideological frameworks, decoding. When the media, or lack thereof, frames an artist like Lola Young in a certain light, then audiences may decode her authenticity and expressions through biased lenses, often influenced by prevailing social norms and expectations. Moreover, digital platforms thrive on this type of engagement, often amplifying content that sparks controversy or outrage. This creates an environment where female artists who deviate from the marketable sexy archetype are subjugated to disproportionate scrutiny. Young's apologetic expression of sexuality and her deviation from conventional pop aesthetics have made her a target for online criticism, illustrating the challenges faced by artists who don't conform to industry norms. This scrutiny is further compounded by societal biases relating to body image, class, and authenticity. Now, Lola Young has a fuller figure, a working class accent, and a more candid demeanour which challenged the polished image often expected of female pop stars. As cultural theorist Gill discusses, post-feminist media culture often demands a compulsory, carefully managed sexual agency from women, where empowerment is expected and acceptable only within narrowly defined boundaries. Young's refusal to conform to these constraints position her outside the comfort zone of mainstream pop culture, which makes her more susceptible to criticism. Even within feminist discourse, critiques of Young's work are sometimes veiled in concern for moral standards, which is something that I kind of went down originally. However, as Susan J. Douglas notes in Enlightened Sexism, such arguments often mask deeper anxieties about women's autonomy and visibility in the public sphere. Young's forthrightness in expressing desire and agency without adhering to industry-sanctioned norms challenges these anxieties, prompting backlash that is less about content and more about control. So in essence, media coverage, in particular social media coverage, doesn't merely report controversies, it plays an active role in shaping them. By posting about her coming out about her sexuality, they then give a platform for all the criticisms about her sexuality. In reality, no one really cares, but this social media post has put it on Facebook where, Facebook dads live. That's all I'm gonna say. By choosing which narratives to amplify and which to ignore, these media outlets shape and influence public perception, often casting women who defy conventional standards as problematic and drawing attention to the more, perhaps, private sections of their life. This dynamic underscores the importance of critically examining how media representations contribute to the marginalisation of voices that challenge the status quo. At the end of the day, Lola Young sang about sex. That's it. She didn't dismantle capitalism. She didn't leak state secrets. She's not taking winter fuel payments off of pensioners. She said that she wants one thing. And a whole lot of people decided that that one thing was too grotesque, too vulgar, too unacceptable coming from her. And that her is the point. This isn't about content, it's about context. In a pop culture landscape that claims to champion sexual empowerment, only some people are allowed to claim it. Women like Lola, those who don't fit the aesthetic mould of polished thinness and class-coded neutrality, are treated like they violated some unspoken decorum by daring to be sexual on their own terms. Meanwhile, other women like Sabrina Carpenter can push the boundaries and, while still facing some critique, are largely reabsorbed into the fold of acceptability because their transgressions are marketable, packageable, pretty, and palatable. What we're really seeing isn't a debate about female sexuality, it's the enforcement of respectability politics through aesthetics, class, and body normativity. It's a culture that says you can be sexual, just not like that, and definitely not when you look like that. And when platforms and media outlets co-sign that logic, or post things when they know it's gonna cause outrage, when they frame certain bodies as vulgar and others as viral, it stops being about music and it becomes a quiet kind of censorship. One policed through disgust, not law. So whilst one thing isn't ruining the youth, the reaction to it, that might be teaching them something far worse, that only some women get heard, and the rest better sing quietly, if not at all. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you're new. And with that, I'll see you soon.